Welcome to the Larry Sultan Visiting Artists Lecture Series. Today's kind of special, one because Larry's kind of part of the lecture, and I think that's just wonderful. That two people that kind of worked with Larry or influenced him through intelligence and fighting with him all the time and challenging his way of thinking. I think it's just, you know, really a special treat to have the two of them here talking about the work that you and Larry did. So thanks for that. Charlotte Cotton's going to introduce. Charlotte Cotton is also a visiting critic and lecturer here at CCA this semester, and will be speaking on April 10th in Timken. She's calling it a thank you for the work that she's done here with students, or what students have given her while she's been here. So I think it'll be a real treat to see that. And then next Tuesday, excuse me, the 18th, is Michael Wolf. He's a German artist. He's really good with architecture, looking at urban environments, and he did a book called Tokyo Compression, which is about people on the subway, and it's a really shocking book to look at.
Very compressed.
Very compressed. I mean, it's, you know what claustrophobia is then. And then the next person will be Charlotte. Then after that, we'll have Alfredo Jar on April 24th. But that will be a meeting that he has with the grad students. All the grad students will meet with him and work with him for the day, or half the day. And that's it for the introductions. As most of you know, many of you might have known Larry. He was a really good friend and colleague, and teacher, great teacher, and very inspired man. And he just walked through his life with a, you know, he didn't always know what the vision was, but he found it, and he found his home, he found his place. And some of the people in this room are ones that he made a home with. So it's really a pleasure to honor him, not only in talking about his work, but also with a lecture series and a visiting artist program that can bring these great people in. And then this is the part that I'll read so I don't screw it up, because it's most important to thank the people who made this happen. And it's not always easy, but it's a collaboration in the best of ways between CCA and Pier 24 and SFMOMA. And I think that the fact that these organizations are working together and trying to sort of make photography a really important topic to think about in San Francisco is great. And then they make it, they turn the wheels, but the people who grease them, you know, is Pier 24 and Robert Anderson and Nicola Miner and Bob and Randy Fisher, and then the Black Dog Private Foundation, and then last but not least, Neon McAvoy. So, I mean, those, I don't know if any of them are in the room, but I really, you know, appreciate that. There's plenty of other great causes to give money to, but I think that this is a wonderful one too. So please welcome Charlotte and enjoy.
Thanks, Jim. It's a real pleasure for me to be introducing Philip Gefter and Mike Mandel, and to be in a room that is so full of what I call Larry love. And it's the love of life that emanated from him, and the love and admiration, lots of love and lots of admiration that those who knew him couldn't help but feel about Larry. Philip Gefter is an amazingly lovely man, full stop. But he was also a New York Times staff writer for 15 years, and a selection of his writings on photography are published in his book entitled Photography After Frank. His biography of collector Sam Wagstaff, entitled Wagstaff Before and After Mapplethorpe, will be published in October 2014. Congratulations. Philip met Larry in the mid-1980s, in the days when Larry was head of photography at SFAI. And you taught for him, didn't you? Yeah. And when Larry had a studio at the Headland Centre for Art, where Philip and Larry would meet on a regular basis. And I feel really privileged because Philip allowed me to read his beautiful, I mean, you always write beautifully, but your really beautiful essay about knowing Larry and his work, which is written for the retrospective exhibition to open at LACMA in November this year, which is great. Your description of what it was like to spend time with Larry resonated with me. The way you describe how you would always learn something from a conversation with Larry not only declares his way of being, but also his way of teaching, learning from genuinely conversing. And I hope you're okay with this, but there was a quote which was just great from your essay. And you were talking about when you'd visit him at Headlands, and you said, sometimes we plumbed the deeply personal, and at others the wildly theoretical. But by the time the sun was levitating just above the horizon line, our serious musings had happily devolved into a bunch of goofy laughter. Mike Mandel needs no introduction. Well, to rephrase that, Mike didn't want me to do an introduction. But I do have some things that I'm going to say that you're doing. Most recently, we do have, you have a video actually which kind of stands in.
You're ruining everything. Just get on to get on.
Oh, stop it. Okay, all right.
Damn.
So, first of all, your recent project is Shelter in Plates, which is a collaboration with Chantal Zakari, which are these amazing plates, some of which you're gifting to dear friends at the moment, which commemorate the fallout from the Boston Marathon bombing in the Watertown district of the city. I am really excited to hear about your forthcoming set of books that will be published by JNL and JNL Books and DAP, 6 self and I think unpublished books of early work. That's so exciting. So you're thinking end of 2015 maybe for that?
Something, hopefully.
Excellent. And we also have the pleasure of looking forward to your SFMOMA exhibition of your early work, which should be around that time.
Around, yeah, a little later.
That's great. And of course, the exhibition that opened yesterday at Stephen Wirtz Gallery, We Make You Us, Billboards and Evidence, at the work of Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan, which is such a timely reminder of the amazing and resonant collaboration that you and Larry had. It's a real privilege to be here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mike and Philip and the spirit of Larry for their personal, wildly theoretical and goofy conversation.
Hi there. It's a treat to be able to go on a time-traveling expedition with Mike, back to his collaborative roots with Larry in the 1970s. But first, I just want to say this. Not to embarrass Mike, but I have been known to say and also write that Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan are clearly the Marcel Duchamp and Man Ray of their era, updating that Dada duo's antic humor with their collaborative conceptual billboards and installation projects, and above all, their masterpiece, Evidence. They turn their political analyses of contemporary culture into a kind of perceptual burlesque, deconstructing various forms of media communication with scrambled messages, deadpan wit, and true observation. On the East Coast, what they were doing used to be called a goof. But when 1960s youth culture started getting stoned, the goof became the mindfuck, or more formally, cognitive dissonance. Their mindfucks were always playful, unexpected, head-scratching, but always done with serious intellectual rigor as a kind of cultural critique. We have a lot of ground to cover in an hour, so on your mark, get set. Mike.
Well, let's see. Last night, Kelly Sultan came over to me and said, you know, I wish, at the Wirtz, I wish you would have talked a little bit more about what it was like when you guys were actually working together, what the spirit was like, what the feeling was like. So I thought, you know, I've always wanted to start off one of these lectures with a song. Are you ready? Here we go.
It's raining tacos.
Louder, gotta go louder.
From out of the sky. Tacos.
Louder.
No need to ask why. Just open your mouth and close your eyes. It's raining tacos. Raining tacos. Out in the street.
You can dance if you want.
Tacos. All you can eat. Lettuce and shells. Cheese and meat. It's raining tacos. Yum, 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 yummity yum. It's like a dream. Yum, 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 yummity yum. Bring your sour cream.
Shell, meat, lettuce, cheese, shell, meat, lettuce, cheese, shell, meat, cheese.
It's raining tacos. Raining tacos. Raining tacos. It's raining tacos. It's raining tacos. Raining tacos. Raining tacos. It's raining tacos.
All right.
See what I mean about a mindfuck?
Just should have been about 10,000 decibels louder, but that's what it was like to work with Larry. We would just oranges on fire,
Okay, great.
and raining tacos are kind of in the same basic sensibility, really. I want to thank my daughter, who introduced me to this song a couple of weeks ago, and
How old is she?
well, I'm getting to that. She's 10, and she, let me listen to it, and I said, this would be really great as an introduction. And she said, Dad, you're doing this as work. You can't do this. And I said, but it'd be kind of funny to do this. And she goes, well, listen, just don't mention my name. So I'm not mentioning her name, but thank you to my daughter for that inspiration. All right.
So let's talk about your collaboration with Larry and how you. Let's start with how you met Larry and whether or not you had anything in common.
Well, Larry and I, as you see, we've got a slide here from Van Nuys. We both grew up in the San Fernando Valley of LA. We didn't meet actually in the Valley. We were there at the same time. We didn't know each other then. We had the same. I think we ate from the same plate, though. We got the same genes from that experience. So I think when we met at the Art Institute in San Francisco here back in the 73, when we started grad school, we kind of gravitated toward each other because, we lived in this kind of an environment. We didn't live, where like the Art Institute was kind of imbued with a certain mystical connection to the Beat Society and all of that kind of tomfoolery that we just didn't identify with. And we lived in, a place that was built with shopping malls as the kind of iconic architecture, and the freeways and the billboards and all of the just junk of our wonderful consumer culture. So I think we connected because of our Los Angeles roots and our feeling about how wrong it was to be in a place where art seemed to be kind of a mystical, romantic kind of strangeness that it wasn't what we were interested in. And also, what was interesting when we were in school together is that independently we were both making images about billboards. We didn't really know that until we would get to the crit and we'd put up our pictures. And I was making images of, well, this is Larry's picture of weathered billboards where kind of something is left from one of this something, and this character is just barely able to get out into the world and is just about to be erased, I guess, from the world. So there'll be this kind of haunting images that are all like Larry's pictures, somewhat emotionally and psychologically haunting. My pictures were more sardonic. I employed the help of my then girlfriend, who later became my first wife, Allison Wolpert, and she and I would be traveling and we'd see something and then she would go and be part of the billboard and interact with it in some way. So we were making images of billboards, and we thought once we recognized our shared interest in that, you can go on to the next fellow. You're going to have to move things along.
I know, it's true.
You're just waiting.
I'm lagging here. I'm like,
you're really slow in that.
This is exactly like, this is like a simulation of the collaboration between Larry and
So we decided at one of our crits that, hey, why don't we just do one? Let's just see if we can get a billboard. And I think Larry made the phone call to the billboard company, and to our delight and our surprise, the guy at the other end of the phone said, "Sure, let's give you a billboard." And what was going on in California and probably all over the United States at that period of time in the early, thank you, that's even better. In the early 70s, can you read this? Is this doing it? Criticized by various governmental organizations, like Lady Bird Johnson in the 60s was on a highway beautification program that wanted to get rid of the billboards. The city of San Diego had already outlawed billboards from the city. And the billboard companies knew that things were kind of a little rocky for their future. They were very concerned about how it was going to work for billboards in the future. So when we came along and said, we can make art on your billboard and we'll get the press to cover our events, and that was all they had to hear, basically, was that we were going to be having this symbiotic relationship with the billboard company. I'll just say that. But they were giving us something, we were giving them something, and we were kind of in bed together, and we were happy about it. So we made our first billboard in, this is the billboard that is the billboard without a name. This is a billboard that our first attempt. We got a location. The location was actually right across the street from the Berkeley Sheet Metal Works. That's the Berkeley Sheet Metal Works. The billboard was right across the street. So we were doing this little Magritte joke about what was on the billboard. And then we had the gardener who would have to be there at the time, cutting the hedge, was in our photograph. And so we had a friend, Larry had a friend actually, who we just happened to connect with again. I hadn't seen since that time last night. But she painted in the gardener into this aerial balloon that was an orange, this kind of mystical or magical California orange that was taking them away from this drudgery of having to cut the hedge. And anyway, the real story behind this, Philip, so I'm not going to take behind this, is that when we invited people, on the next slide, to the
oh no, I'm lacking again.
To the opening. Another one.
These are two guys from Van Nuys in this picture.
So when we invited people to come to the opening, which were our friends, they came, but the people that also came were people that we didn't invite, and they were people who lived right there in the neighborhood and were interested in the fact that we had recognized their little corner and were just participating in this little celebration, and that really affected us very dramatically. That we didn't think we weren't really thinking much about this. We just figured we were making this billboard out there in the world, but the real ramifications were that we were making something out in the world, and the world could actually interact with it. So the neighbors that were there who lived around the billboard were coming to interact with us and to recognize us for recognizing them. And that's why I think if that hadn't happened, if this bad billboard, this one that wasn't such a great design, hadn't happened, we wouldn't have done any other billboards. That's why that one's important.
How did you and Larry did you get along while you made this billboard? I mean, was it an encumbered thing, or was it simple and easy and fun? Was it fun?
Yeah, it was. We got along. This time we got along. I mean, I think making this is a black and white photograph, so it meant you'd have to make this 10 by 22 foot photograph by hand, which meant going into the dark room, and you'd have these big troughs, and you'd have the paper that was like 42 inches wide, and you'd be going not like this with the paper to develop the paper, and it was kind of crazy. doing it. And of course, every time you screwed one up, was another hour's worth of hassle to make one. But anyway, we kind of liked that. I think that the challenge of doing all that was a lot of fun, and it kind of bonded us. I was doing work on my own at the time, and Larry was doing his own work, obviously, and we just kind of slowly, through all the time that we spent together on these kinds of projects, became kind of a duo. We just sort of decided to become a team.
So I want to read something Larry wrote about his collaboration with Mike. He wrote this in a letter in 1984. It still amazes me that two people with such different personalities and artistic sensibilities have been able to work together over the years. Mike hates my cooking and thinks that I jam hot peppers into every foodstuff I serve. He says potato, and I say frittata. He loses things and blames me. Seriously, when I first met Mike, I was ambivalent about his work. It was very different than mine, more cynical and stylized, yet I was very impressed that he had the guts to publish his own book and that his work was using humor as a device for social criticism. For me, working with Mike was a means of recovering the alienated parts of myself, the social realities I had disinfected from my work, but not my consciousness. It only became painful when during the mid-'70s, people would ask me if I was the guy who helps Mike Mandel with his projects. What did he mean by that? Like, that you helped him recover the alienated parts of himself?
Well, I guess without alienation, what have you got, really? Alienation is about having that kind of sense of fighting back because the country's fucked up, basically. That's what the alienation part was. It was looking at, and it never changes. It's always the same thing.
Did that drive your work? That idea?
That's what keeps us alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it gives you. That's what enables you to have a sense of humor, because otherwise you'd die.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, so yeah, I think there was that.
But do you think that sense of the country was fucked up was sort of underlying some of what your work was addressing?
I think eventually we began to think about the billboard and realize its function as a instrument in the dissemination of consumer material to turn us all into robots and just make tacos for the rest of our lives. And that's what we have turned out to be. We have become people who care about our phones more than anything else, and all the wonderful products that we can get on Amazon, and that's who we are.
So let's talk about the oranges and the evolution of that
right.
billboard.
So, the first billboard led to the second billboard, and the second billboard was based on our postcard collection, which Larry and I both had an extensive one of. And the one on the left here is called, as you see, California Gold Fills the Horn of Plenty, and the one on the right was Florida Gold Fills the Horn of Plenty. We found both of those postcards, and we kind of loved the fact that you can just have one for one market and one for the other. But we chose the California one because we liked, we were in California. And we decided that we would turn this into a billboard about California and talk about kind of the general transformation of California. So when we get to, as the image moves from left to right, again, these are like black and white photographs that are painted in, and again, we weren't painters, we weren't very good at doing this. It kind of took us a long time to do it. But anyway, the woman we called the Bathing Beauty, she was still left in black and white, and all of the oranges were part of the kind of historical reference of the citrus industry in California. And then as we move to the right, the oranges disappear. Actually, the school that I went to as an undergrad, Valley State, Cal State Northridge, which I call Valley State, was an orange grove, actually, before they built it as a school. So that's the idea, was that the entertainment industry, the movie industry, the Bathing Beauty represents this. She became the replacement for that. So anyway, it's not a very good billboard in the sense that you don't really get that when you drive down the street, because you've only got about 6 seconds to get it. That's how billboards work, and we kind of understood that a little later, that billboards are something that you have to process very quickly. But anyway, that was the ideology built into this billboard. And what wonderfully happened to us is that We got some coverage by the local media, the Chronicle, the Examiner. Both came out, both did these really terrible human interest stories about these wacky artists that would do something like this and just turned us into buffoons. But anyway, they covered it. And then 3 days after the billboard was up, it became covered over by an advertisement. Philip?
Yes, okay, there we are.
It was covered over by an advertisement for sun-kissed oranges. So it, to us, was just a little bit too strange to hear them on the phone say, well, you know, it's just a mix-up. It was just, you know, we were going to give you a month, but it was just something came up and we put this up by mistake. And so we had a couple of friends of Larry's who, you know, Larry was a political science major early on. I was a political science major early on. One of Larry's friends, Neil Bardak, who was at the talk last night, he may be here tonight for all I know, turned into a lawyer and accompanied us to Foster & Kleiser, the billboard company, and we sat down and said, you know, this just isn't going to work. We've got to do something about how you've, you know, hurt these guys, and what can we do to you know, to right this wrong. And what they did was they said, okay, we'll give you, you know, 10 free billboards. So really that was the best thing that could have happened. So we decided with the 10 free billboards, we were going to burn the oranges. And we kind of, first we didn't burn the oranges immediately, but we were kind of playing around with other things. We were thinking about maybe bricks would kind of break through the billboard, but then we decided to burn the oranges. And not a very easy thing to do. Don't try this at home. You can't really burn oranges without maybe burning yourself. We ended up making another photograph of a hand holding oranges, and then we made this painting, which help of another friend who painted in the flames, Susan Tate, painted in the flames for us, and I painted in the oranges, and then it turned into oranges on fire, and we kind of, I think this is one where we finally got the language of the billboard advertising down, which is this kind of quickly processed image, quickly processed linguistic message. The only problem is, what the hell does it mean?
You can just imagine, like, you know, some students in San Francisco walking down the street, stoned, looking up and seeing oranges on fire and going, what the fuck?
Larry, but I would also play the innocent interviewer on the street, you know, just asking people innocently, you know, what do you think? What is this about? And people would kind of, it was wonderful to hear what the people came up with, that this was a new movie, it was a rock band, it was Jesus. Jesus could be really the one who could hold the burning oranges without getting burned.
It's interesting that it's fire, because Larry also, he talked about how his first forays into photography were camera-less, and so he and a friend would make these little fires and then run away and turn around and peek at the fires, and to him that was the act, that was almost the photographic gesture. And this was probably what, 5 years before you made this billboard. So the fire imagery, I mean, did that come from Larry? Was that part of a fetish? Was it?
Right. Well, it's a great story. It actually came from How to Read Music in One Evening, which maybe we'll see that image later, which is a direct reference to holding something that you're not supposed to hold on to. But as far as Larry's fetish with fires is, you know, that's something I wasn't privy to. Although we did have a lot of fun burning oranges in the backyard, I have to say. So, all right, so there were 10 of these. This is in Santa Cruz, where I was living, and spent a good 20-some years of my life. My son is here tonight, who's come from Santa Cruz as well. And
so let's see. So let's talk a little bit about your influences.
Sure. Coming out of LA, you know, I had a really great opportunity. You know, this was such a great time for photography everywhere, but especially on the West Coast, and especially in LA. I mean, I think, well, the West Coast, you know, it's really LA, not so much San Francisco, but, you know, I had really great people to connect with. both at Cal State Northridge or Valley State. I mean, there are people like Todd Walker, Edmund Teskey, Ed Sievers, some people that you wouldn't even recognize, but all had very divergent attitudes about photography and about the use of photography. And Robert Heineken. Heineken was teaching at UCLA, and he was kind of the dean of the photographers of the community. He was the one that kind of glued us all together. And every time there was an opening, every time there was an event, when he would invite Frederick Sommer to come and talk, he would make sure that everybody in the whole LA community would know about it and get over there to make sure that they could hear that talk. And Robert Heineken was a really great guy, and even though he was never my teacher, he became a really good friend. Even while I was an undergraduate, he became a friend of mine. When I think about that now, and I think about what the environment is like for students in relationship to their professors, you know, where I teach at Harvard, I teach at the Museum School in Boston, that kind of, there's a certain gulf in the amount of just open-endedness that one would have. I mean, when I saw Ed, you know, we would just go over to his place in Venice, get stoned, and go play Frisbee on the beach. I mean, that was our relationship. He was my professor.
But this Heineken is a very
okay, so let me talk about
seminal
Heineken.
piece for you.
We want to get back to Robert. For me, this was a really watershed moment, was to go to, and Ellen Brooks reminded me that probably where I saw this was not Pasadena, it was probably Downey, California, where there was a show, and Robert's work was first shown there. So what he did is set up this little living room environment, and all he did was take the TV tube and in front of it insert a film transparency of this headless, nude woman torso, and then turn on the TV. Why don't we play the movie? Why don't you actually click on the inner...
how do we do that?
Click on that inside picture of the nude, and
Oh,
it'll
if
play.
I click on it? Oh, really?
Yeah,
This?
yeah. Should work.
Oh, wow.
Is it?
I don't know. It's trying.
Yeah, there we go.
Wow.
Here we go. So this is a
How cool.
you know, this is not the original, which was back, you know, in 1970, so that we don't have the original documentation, but they've got some of the original imagery of broadcast TV from the time. I think what's really wonderful about this is that you'd be watching TV, whatever was on TV, whether it was you know, a particular Winston cigarette ad, or whether it was a baseball game, or whether it was the Star-Spangled Banner before the baseball game, all of it was being read through this nude, sexualized image. And this gesture, this simple, very minute little gesture of just putting that film transparency in front of the TV tube was just mind-boggling to me. It was really just right on mark about what it meant to make art, what it meant to be a conceptual artist and make something happen really powerfully with a very swift and very articulate, swift stroke.
Well, it is a very concise and articulate gesture. In fact, I mean, and you've talked about subliminal seduction. That was a book that was very influential to you, and this is a perfect, I mean, it's better than an illustration of that. It's actually kind of a very poetic gesture that led to your next, well, actually, it didn't lead to your next billboard, but this was a billboard you and Larry did 10 years later, but is, I think, a perfect evolution from that Robert Heineken piece.
Right. Well, I'm going to just change the conversation a second, because I think what Heineken's significance to me isn't so much about the fact that he was dealing with the subliminal aspect of advertising. What he was doing was he was allowing chance to become a really significant component of one's experience, and that was really what was powerful for me, was this chance implication. Anyway, to talk about certainly Heineken was using magazines and vernacular imagery, and you know, there were these great pieces he did where he took these Vietnam atrocity images of the guy holding the severed heads of the Viet Cong, and silk screening them on top of every page of Newsweek magazine, and then taking the magazine and putting them back out in the newsstands. You know, that was really a wonderfully subversive event that really inspired me as well.
There's just on that. There's a retrospective exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York of Robert Heineken's work, and there's one wall of these magazines that he called revised magazines. And on the wall text, there's a quote by Heineken I just want to read. He says, "I sometimes visualize myself as a bizarre gorilla investing in a kind of humorous warfare in which a series of minimal, direct, invented acts result in maximum extrinsic effect, but with no consistent rationale. I might liken it to the intention of making police photographs in which there is no crime involved." It seems to me that that speaks very much to your sensibility.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it also connects with evidence, which we'll talk about.
Right, yes, exactly.
Well, what we're looking at is Larry and I, we would get inspiration by going to McDonald's bookstore in San Francisco here. We would just, that was like that was the reservoir. So this is like a used bookstore. It was just a big junk store. It was just like stuff stacked on floors, nothing organized. I don't even know how this place was a business really, but we would go there and we just look at stuff, and so we were looking through magazines, and then we noticed, and we would look through like the Winston cigarette ads, and we'd see things about what they were doing, how they were kind of positioning the models. This is the Kent Golden Lights campaign, and if you look, at the way the males are handling the cigarette, or actually the way the males are not touching the cigarette. Right. And the women use the V shape to hold a cigarette, then you realize that there is really this subliminal stuff going on here. It's about not touching the penis and using the vagina to let the cigarette pass through. Really, that's what's going on, right? And don't tell me that I'm wrong. So we saw that, and we figured we'd make something out of it. And the Billboard Company, again, was kind of our patron. They were letting us do whatever we wanted to do, basically. We made this image, and we showed it to our Billboard Company president, and he goes, yeah, sure, we'll get to this one soon. And 80% of their clientele were the cigarette companies, right? So they never did get to this one. This is one where that just didn't happen. Fortunately for us, there was a opportunity with an exhibition that was going on called Appropriation, something. There was a number of artists that were in that show, and we were asked to be part of that show, and they decided they would produce this as a smaller version of itself and be put up in the 7 different locales where the show was traveling. So it was produced, and it did go up, and this was, I'm not even sure where this is. I think probably somewhere around here. You know where it is? I don't remember either. But it was in 7 different places, and the fact that it's Foster and Kleiser could mean that it was probably local. But we make you us, we make you use, we make you into us, and the process was we had these things, we wanted to translate them in some way, and we went to a printer, and we thought we might make black and white prints out of it in the offset process, and we looked at the plates that they made, these paper plates that they were using to make the prints, and the paper plates were just like rich in black. They were just like heavy, smeared, ugly black. And it was like, wow, that's it. The plates are it. We're going to use these plates. Forget the prints we're making. We're going to use these plates to become the image for the billboard. Can you talk about how much of this billboard, what parts of this billboard are you and what parts are Larry? No. A little bit? We were really not ever looking at it from the perspective of, there's Mike's way of thinking about things. The only way that I can think about that is that I was always pushing for a little more humor in the work. And Larry would be, he had a good sense of humor. He just wanted to be sure I wasn't too stupid. Raining tacos would not happen if Larry were here. It just would not happen because it would just make us look like fools, right? So, but I would be the kind of person who said, I want to look like a fool because let it all go. It's just, it doesn't matter. You can be a fool. That's the only real kind of, push me, pull you that was going on. Well, good. That's actually what I was trying to get to. That's great. But as far as most of the work, it was just a matter of trying to figure it out. And we were really so lucky. We were like 22. We had no job. Well, Larry had he got a job. I had no job. We had no you know, we had no mortgages, we had nothing, you know, we had nothing really except just our time. We had a lot of time. So I could come up from Santa Cruz and we could spend 2 days together, and he could get up and he could make me that frittata and I could complain about it. And then we would just get to work and we would just try to figure out what the next thing was we were going to try to do. What was the next idea? What was the symbol that we could use to make the next billboard thing happen? And it's hard to describe exactly what that was. It was just, we just were, you know, working toward it. I was thinking about, and when we get to Who's News, you know, how did we get to that? We had to kind of go through a number of images to get to Who's News when we get to that one. Well, here it is.
Here it is.
So it's like, you know, how did we get to this? We were thinking about, I don't know what, it wasn't, you know, this, but finally we just figured out that after we'd be reading a lot, and we'd read, you know, at the time, you know, we would read McLuhan. McLuhan would say things like, you know, advertising is news. Advertising is the good news, and all the other stuff in the newspaper is the bad news. And you need the good news so that people will, you know, be able to stomach all the bad news. And so we thought about that, you know, here we're using this advertising medium, which is news. I mean, we do care about the fact that what's on that billboard it's the new stuff. It's the stuff we all want to have. It's news. So whose news uses us, or whose news abuses us? And we thought, well, how are we going to, you know, so we went and we figured, let's use some, you know, plastic letters. We got some of those, you know, little letters you put on your refrigerator, and we didn't like those for the main piece. What about something more, you know, professional, official looking? We got these ceramic letters, and we started, you know, kind of playing around with them. And then we liked the idea of controlling the letters with this fishing line that kind of created a kind of a puppeteer marionette controlling effect on the news. We were controlling the news. They were in position by by our control. I mean, this shows you how professional our studio looked. This is Larry's kitchen table, basically. And then it was then translated by the billboard company. We just gave them the photo. And you saw the picture earlier of Herb, the painter, who no longer has a job there anymore because everything's digital now. They have no. But this was, you know, a hand-painted oil painting on wood.
Where was this?
This is at Pine and Kearney. And
was there any reaction to it that you know of?
Yeah, I think. Well, I was just saying the other day that we would always play this kind of little game of just interviewing people when we were walking down the street, and we did ask somebody what they thought about this billboard, and one person said, you know, it looks like something that Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan would do. I thought, well, I guess we have actually gotten out there through those stupid human interest stories. Maybe somebody's actually been, you know, following us a little bit, even though the art media, you know, couldn't care less about this stuff. But as far as any other reaction, I think the billboard company had no idea what we were doing. But they were happy that we were getting press. That's all they cared about. We were getting press.
I mean, what you were doing was actually very subversive.
Well,
yeah. And that just went right by them.
Well, of course, and of course, it probably went by most people.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if most people who would see this would even get it, what I just described,
Right.
which is a problem. You know, it's like you want to make sure that you do communicate, and if you're too convoluted, then it might be really smart in your own eyes, but if it's not functioning, then it's a problem. One of our other pieces, which I don't remember if Ties is in this or not, I think Ties is probably not, but it was one that didn't work, even though it was a really elegant piece, because it looked a little bit too much like an ad. And so when we asked people about it, they thought it really was an advertisement. They thought it was, that was a department store advertisement. So this one certainly didn't fit that. I think it was probably our most successful billboard in terms of being true to the message that we really wanted to get across about why we were engaged in using the context of the billboard, why we cared about it, which was to say that it was a mind fuck. It's controlling you, and let's just make sure we're aware. That's all you can do, is just be aware as you can.
But it's also, I mean, it is a mind fuck, but with very serious, political intentions or cultural intentions. And, you know, I just want to say at this juncture, you know, I mentioned Duchamp and Man Ray, and there's part of a kind of art historical continuum that I think Larry and Mike fall directly into, that starts with Duchamp and Man Ray and then goes to the Fluxus movement in the 1960s. And I don't know how many of you know what that is, but I'm going to tell you. It was kind of conceived by George Maciunas, who is the father of the Fluxus movement in the 1960s. He wanted to call it Neo-Dadaism, but realized that Dada was bound to its own era, so he came up with this name, Fluxus, that which is in flux, and that chance, notion of chance, and it became a movement characterized by the playful subversion of art traditions, in that case. Artists like Namjoon Paik and Lamont Young, George Brecht, Alan Capro, and Yoko Ono were kind of among a roster of Fluxus artists who would, their weapons of choice were feeble jokes, verbal and visual puns, ordinary everyday materials, satiric publications, instructions for absurd performances. I mean, it sounds like Larry and Mike. And also, I mean, underlying a lot of that was bypassing the commercial gallery system. You know, Fluxus novelties were meant to be kind of sold cheaply by mail, in artist-run stores, you know, this kind of public art. And so what's interesting to me, and we've talked about this, you didn't know anything about the Fluxus at the time.
Yeah, at the time, Fluxus, you know, as you say, was a New York-centric activity. So we certainly weren't talking about it. And the kind of education we were getting at the Art Institute, we weren't learning about it. And so it wasn't, it just wasn't, I think things, what we were learning was that when there's enough similar information that's kind of out there in the ether, that people will pick up on it. And I think that's what happens, is that people were picking up on that in different parts of the country, and we were just picking up, you know, in our way in LA. And we had, you know, we had Heineken, and we had Kienholz, and we had Rouchet, and we had plenty of people that were renegades that were leading us in the right direction.
Right, exactly, and they actually begat what became known as the Pictures Generation artists. But you and Larry anticipated them by, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at least. But it's sort of this East Coast, West Coast, what was happening simultaneously had not cross-pollinated. But, you know, as you say, that this kind of, the simultaneity occurs, which is a very interesting thing. And I don't know, I just thought it was worthy of mention. Okay. So let's go to How to Read Music.
Right. So back at McDonald's bookstore again, we ran into the Sunset House catalog, of which you see a page from, and this is again before, you know, you have to remember now, you have to take the time machine back, you know, before there was the web and all that stuff. This is, if you wanted a consumer product, you might get one of these mail order catalogs, and you'd find some little funny device that would help you sleep, or help you stop snoring, or help you pull out something from the potatoes or whatever, you know, just all these dopey little things. And we just thought they were, you know, we would look at the pictures and not read the text, and see that the pictures were really quite funny. And one of the pictures, as you see, was How to Read Music in One Evening. We thought, so that was pretty funny too, that you could actually, you know, get something in the mail and it would teach you how to read music in one evening. And so we collected a lot of the Sunset House catalogs, and we actually found a lot of these similar things in the backs of ladies' magazines, places like Women's Circle and Woman's Day, and I think Family Circle, Woman's Day. There was same kind of stuff. And then Larry and I got together, and we laid out all the stuff we collected, and in one evening, we made this book. So it was really How to Read Music in One Evening. So we, as we go on, we can see that we would make these kinds of relationships of, you know, like pulling and pushing and pulling.
Did you find these, or did you make these?
No, as I said, these are all pictures that came out of the Sunset House catalog. So we found all these things, and then just took them away from the text and put them together and make these. And I think the idea of the sequential relationship was something that we learned by looking at photography and understanding that Evans was making sequential relationships, Frank was doing it, and most notably at that time, Ralph Gibson was really clearly understanding how to make formal connections between pictures in his books. So we use that understanding. This obviously is one of the more sexually interesting pages out of the book. When I show this to my students, I mean, that's as far as I go with it, and I don't have to tell you any more, right? And we can keep going.
That's pretty good.
This is not ours. This is not from How to Read Music. This is a Robert Heineken piece. And this was made in 1965. How to Read Music was in 1974. And I was 15 in 1965. I never saw this piece when it was made. I didn't know about it until after How to Read Music was all done. But it kind of shows you why Robert Heineken was such the right kind of guy for me to connect with, and for Larry and I both to connect with. Because here in '65, this is a couple years after Kennedy had been assassinated. These images, this would have been a little bit too heavy-handed for Larry and I to do, but for Robert, I guess it had the right statement. But it certainly is very similar to the How to Read Music work. So this is more more along the lines of our stuff, which is more.
You can see how it anticipates evidence very clearly.
Yeah, there are these definite relationships. They're obtuse. They're not really thematic necessarily, but they're about vision. They're about doubling. They're about not seeing, about brightness, not in darkness. There's all these things in there, but they're not overt. So they kind of suggest one thing or another. And again, like this would be one that I'd kind of argue for, that we needed to get this one in the book. And Larry would say, too sexy, can't do this. We don't. But I would say, well, you're just going to have to give me this one. And we would go for that, and we'd kind of bargain a little bit. And I got my sex into the book. But we wouldn't have to argue about this one. These were people that just were made to be together. I'm sure they're living in Sherman Oaks right now very happily.
So, but you would argue over the sequence or have discussions about it and sort of discuss the implications?
Well, what we would be doing is we would just be taking pictures and we'd be putting them next to each other, and we'd say this one is working, or this is too similar, or this is just too much the same thing, or this makes a nice connection. We'd just be playing. We'd have like the floor would be covered with these pictures, and we would just start making connections, and then we'd say, oh, this is a good one. And we were making diptychs, triptychs. That's about as far as we figured we were going. And
so you were this was really fun.
This was, as I said, it literally took us one night to do this project. And I guess you can kind of make a story out of this one if you want, about the guy in the middle who stole a 10-year anniversary present and ran away with all the valuables at the bottom. Or you don't have to make that story up either. But
so then, as I said, this anticipated evidence, and I just want to make this comment about evidence before we talk about it. Evidence is a stunningly simple, albeit labor-intensive exercise in recontextualization that challenged the foundations of canonical thinking about photography in the same way Duchamp's fountain had challenged the meaning of art. And since the pictures, as you'll see in a minute, since the pictures so closely resembled the black and white documentary images that came to define art photography in the 1970s, evidence was among the early postmodern works to contest the growing acceptance of photography as art, the photographer as artist-author, photographic documentation as fact, the truth-telling capability of the medium as unwavering. Individually, the pictures take on surrealist properties subject to endless narrative interpretation. Collectively, the sequencing creates a running narrative with no coherent story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I don't know about the no coherent story part. That's cutting it a little close. because I think the book does have a sequential flow, and there is a climactic place in the book, and then there's a closing in the book. And if you read it, you'll find that out. You have to look at it a little more closely.
Oh, I do. Really? I had no idea. Can you talk about just briefly how, like, what you did? I mean, just to amass these images and.
Well, let me just go back just a little bit, just to say that about things being in the air. You know, around the same period of time, you know, Sarkovsky had put out from the Picture Press, which were all these journalistic photographs that he had curated as being unusual and kind of odd, and ought to be looked at from another perspective than just as journalism. And we had, at the same time, got Michael Lessie was producing his books, a series of books, Time Frames, Wisconsin Death Trip, that were all pictures he culled from small town photographers, commercial photographers that were making just documents of community life. So again, use of vernacular photography to make some kind of an expressive work out of. And Ken Graves and Mitchell Payne here in San Francisco did a book called The American Snapshot, using again the vernacular image to speak to that, to kind of elevate the vernacular image and talk that it's something to really think about. There's a lot of power in these family snapshots. So there's all that going on. And you know, we were playing with these found images of how to read music, and we were also then building up to evidence by doing the next project, which was called Replaced, where we had looked at a lot of medical journals, and really the best place we found for medical photographs was the Kodak book on clinical photography, which is, I said last night, it's like the greatest pornography book you'll ever find if you want to take a look at it. It's hard to find now, but Kodak put out this book to teach clinicians how to make pictures, you know, of people who had some kind of disease, and how to do the lighting, and how to, you know, just make the right photographs. But they were all pictures of, you know, young naked girls, you know, kind of full frontal nudes in these clinical poses, which were just incredibly pornographic. Anyway, we used a lot of those pictures and from other medical journals to make a show, which we had at the Darkroom Workshop Gallery in Berkeley, called Replaced. And then we finally figured out, you know, let's do something on another level, take it to the highest level that we can. And we figured that there were more places to go than the typical places. So we went to NASA in Mountain View, and we thought, you know, here's technology and progress and science, and we'll find something maybe. And we looked at all these pictures from the moon, and we thought, you know, we've seen all this stuff, and that's not very interesting. And then we saw this one picture, and it was a guy, he was holding a video camera that was like, you know, like a prototype of a video camera. It didn't look like a video camera, it looked like a cardboard box. And he had a crew cut like Jack Webb from Dragnet. You know, he just looked like a really funny guy. He was kind of standing sideways holding this like gun, a video camera, and it was like, this was a NASA photograph, and we thought, this is really funny. This is really a stupid picture, one of the stupidest pictures we've ever seen. And I bet there's a lot of other pictures that are just so odd and you know, sitting out there in similar kinds of venues. So we didn't know exactly where to go. We started kind of going out in a fan. We thought, let's go to police departments, let's go to Jet Propulsion Laboratory, let's go to the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, let's go. And you know, the police departments were sort of interesting, but you know, they were way too hot. You know, like,
all of these places had archives. So you went to their photographic archives.
Yes,
okay.
Right. So we'd go, and the police would, and we also had validation. We had a NEA grant as a photographer's fellowship that said, you know, we were doing a survey of great industrial photography, and there was going to be a show at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which we hadn't gotten yet, but we were in the process of getting. And you know, that piece of paper was just golden, because you know, that was before anybody, you know, thought the NEA was a place where the devil lived. So that was when, you know, there was like an agency of the federal government was giving us this validation that we were doing a project that was worth note. And so all these places, you know, Lockheed Aircraft, Northrop Aeroneutronic, Ford, you know, they would all just go, yeah, we want to be in this show. We definitely would like to invite you in. And we soon figured out, you know, that those were the places that we really wanted to go. We wanted to go to Bechtel. We wanted to go to the places that were building the future, that were building the weaponry, that were building these big projects in Abu Dhabi. And they weren't going to let us see the pictures that they were making that day, because a lot of this stuff was classified, because Northrop was making weapons for the government. So they would show us pictures that they'd made maybe 5 to 10 years ago. And most of these pictures that we look at, now again, we're looking at pictures that they made, and most of the pictures that were made back then in the early 70s, late 60s, were being made with large format 4x5 cameras in-house, and they had archives of thousands of pictures. We would look at thousands and thousands of pictures. I mean, one day at the Metropolitan Water District in LA, Larry and I figured we looked at 400,000 photographs in one day. Right. Larry would start on one side of the room, and I started on the other side of the room, and we'd have these big notebooks, and we'd open up like 24 pictures at one time, 12 4x5s on this page, 12 4x5s on that page, and we just kind of scan them, and just scan them, and just scan them, and just scan them, and then, if we found one that we liked, we'd write down the number. At the end of the day, we'd go back and we would compare our notes on which ones Larry chose, which ones I chose. We'd throw out the ones that we both didn't agree on. And then we would give the institution the list of numbers, and then we'd wait for the mail to come. And that was always exciting, because then we get a big package in the mail of photographs that they had made for us. And we collected about 300 photographs from about 80 different agencies around, mostly California. It was mostly about, it was so great that most of the stuff was in California. Yeah. Even though we did go to Washington, D.C. to just kind of see if there was a lot of government stuff, but there wasn't much there. It was mostly about building the future in Southern California with the aircraft, space industry, and in Silicon Valley.
How long did that process take you?
It was about 2 years to look through 2 million photographs. God. And we looked through 2 million. And so the process was where we would look through these thousands of photographs, and then Larry would say, okay, let's get out and go to the strip joint. That was the thing to do after that. It was hit the strip joint, and then it was like that's the only thing you could do.
No sex and how to read music, but it's okay to go after.
Well, I just wanted you to know where the valley came from. Was out of that, basically. Right. We would go to this every time we would do this. That was the ritual. I mean, we had to do that. I mean, it's like, think about it. If you looked at like 40,000 photographs, sure. You would just be kind of like brain dead, and just be kind of like, oh, this is, you have to kill yourself. So you would do this, and this would just be really stupid, and then that would just kind of wake you up a little bit and allow you to get back to your normal life. So that was the ritual.
So then you had 300 images like in the end, after all of this, you sort of collected, and then what? Then what did you do with them?
Well, so then we culled those down as best we could, and then Larry was teaching then at Lone Mountain College, and we kind of took over a space there, and we just put them all up on a wall, all the ones that we thought had some potential. We just put them all up, and then we would start our process, which was to make connections. How does this picture relate to this picture? We were thinking of we're thinking about a book. We weren't really thinking about the show. We were thinking about a book, and Evidence is a book. And if you actually go back to the first image of Evidence before even this is the book itself was really thought about very closely about how it would look. This blue buckram cover with the text, the typography that looked evidential, and there was no fly sheet, or not fly sheet. There's no what's the
title page, or
no dust jacket. There was no dust jacket. Thank you. No dust jacket to the book. It was just meant to look like it was a kind of a informational book that would be produced by some agency, and that's how it was sold. In fact, there was a number of bookstores that would send the book back to us and say, we got the book without the dust jacket. Would you please give us a new copy? But they didn't understand what it was. Anyway, so you can look at the pictures. So it starts out where there's images that are typically evidence from, news, or not news, police and fire and those kinds of sources. And the idea of the trace and the scale, and even the photograph here is kind of a trace. The photograph isn't all there, and we'd find those ways of making relationships that would either be formal or have some kind of psychological connection as they would face each other. So you're looking at the facing pages that are in the book right now.
And I just want to add, there are no captions, and there's no reference to where these pictures come from. So all you have is the photograph and the juxtaposition. That's all you have to go on when you're looking at it.
And it's kind of funny that sometimes I'm halfway through this lecture and people still say, you know, how did you make that photograph? And I'm going like, where are you listening to this at all? Like, you're listening to this? We did not make these photographs. These are all pictures that we collected. And we enjoyed the fact that the act of photography was implicated in the photograph that we were using. So we were kind of bringing photography into the discussion. You know, obviously, that when this picture of the pants would be made as a final print, the extra information on the edges would be cropped out, or the same thing with that machine. You know, the hand and the arm and the paper would just be a backdrop. You wouldn't even know it was there. But we wanted to, again, include the act of photography as part of the story of what was going on here. This photography was being used as this device to create an illusion. Keep going, Philip. Let's keep going here.
Can you? I mean, one thing. Is it possible? Would it puncture the mystique of these pictures to talk about, let's say, where that rope picture came from and what it actually was? Forensic. I
mean, the best. You know, and I think I do the best I can because most of the time I can't remember myself where they came from, but I can tell you that this, you know, and when I show this to my students too, I say, you know, what is this? And then, you know, one person will say, it's a rope, and then the other person will say, and I'll say, well, yeah, and then they'll say, because they're waiting for me, or you know, I'm waiting for the next answer, and they'll go, well, it's a noose. Yeah, right, it is a noose, isn't it? It's kind of like a noose, and that was the implication of why we chose the picture. It looked a little bit like this death symbol. And then the picture on the right, I think, came from General Atomic Company. I don't really know if that matters. You know, there wouldn't be any reference to that in the book. You don't know where it comes from. But it just was this, Larry and I always called it the blob. Yeah. It was the blob. It was this kind of really uncomfortable thing. Why it was there, you know, what it did, why it was bad, why it had to be photographed, why it had to be disciplined this way, we don't know. But we do know that it was waiting for us to find it and to get it next to the noose so that it could feel even more uncomfortable. And then there's this kind of notion about the hot and the cool, where the image on the left would be the cooler image. It's just rice, and it's again, there's a guy who's, you know, holding up a card to show you the rice, but it doesn't really have a lot of psychological significance or impact. But then the guy on the right, he's a guy. You know, there's a person there, more so than the guy on the left. I mean, he's the main show is the guy on the right, and he's got like wires that are kind of connected to him. It looks like he's attached to the clock. He's kind of looking off to the side like, I hope I die. I hope I don't die after this is over, or I just wish I wasn't here in this kind of stupid-looking suit, or whatever he's thinking. And so that would be a much hotter image. That would be a much more there's more information that you would feel something from, which would influence the image that was the cooler image on the other side. And we would be thinking about those kind of balances of the hot versus the cool image.
You know, it's funny. So, I mean, just to draw a reference to what was going on culturally at that moment, Saturday Night Live had just started in 1975, and they had this ongoing skit then with Dan Aykroyd was a host, and one week it would be bad cinema, and the next week it would be bad art. And I mean, this represents, like, this would be bad photography, you know. But that's exactly what you were getting at, in a way, is that kind of like what you called a stupid picture. I mean, like, it's so stupid because it is what it is. It's so deadpan and so, you know, opaque at the same time. Does that make sense? Is that right, or is that? Well,
yeah, some of them were kind of funny, stupid pictures. And like the guy on the right, it seemed like this was just, it's kind of a sad picture of this guy, and it wasn't intended to be. And so there was just that overlay to it. It's funny you would mention Saturday Night Live, because my favorite part of those series was women's problems. And it was just a bunch of guys, really sleazy guys talking about, you know, God, these women, they are always talking about their, hysterectomies, and it's just a waste of time. It's just, can you believe it? Anyway.
I mean, what's interesting is they are very factual photographs, but, like, what's the fact? I mean, what is the fact? What is what's going on?
Right. Well, this is where I don't have that much to say. Just kind of let's
It's
just
a
look at it.
rhetorical question, I assure you. It's, you know.
Well, let's just kind of run through them here.
Yeah.
And, you know, so if we go back, we don't go back, but if you remember what we just saw, there was these horses' hooves next to this radiology machine. So I guess this horse needed a little attention. And then we would make you turn the page because we wouldn't have this shape of the horseshoe that would be positioned directly opposite the horse's hoof because that would just be too obvious of a connection. So we would have you turn the page and then you'd remember what you just saw. And then that picture of that horseshoe plastic thing with whatever container that it's about to be placed into, or who knows what's going on there, I have no idea really, would connect nicely with the hands, sort of the horse's hoof reference to the hands that are, again, all this measuring that's going on with the grid and the attention or the assistance with the analytic process with some caregiver or some clinician would be present as well here.
So there was some narrative logic or sequential logic.
There always is there is a sequence going on here, for
Yeah.
sure. There is a sequence. It's just, we're not showing you the whole book. It moves into a series of landscapes later on, so we kind of give you the sense of the space of technology and its human control over the space. And then there's this kind of explosion of craziness that happens where things just kind of go just explosive, and then it kind of all settles down into the end of the world, sort of. This is kind of out there in space a bit, out there in the space. There's a fallen capsule. Again, the photograph is implicated by the shadow of the photographer. And then there's this residue of a corner of an explosion that must have occurred for that concrete to have that texture embedded in it. So yeah, so these are these kind of environments that, again, were being used for some experiments or some evaluation, measurement.
I mean, they do look very much like the black and white, quote, art photography of that era, and yet they're not. I mean, they almost undermine the very kind of idea of that kind of art photography of the era.
Well, you know, I always hate it when someone says that, because that's what people would say, was that you know, you were making a Ed Ruscha picture, you were making the William Wegman picture, or this and that, and that's not at all what we were thinking about. So there was never any interest in looking at, you know, kind of this referencing art photography. We completely were never accept anything like that as an idea.
But the gesture actually does, it sort of undermines the notion of the art photograph.
Well, yes, we were not making, I mean, I think what the moment was the moment for the signature artist. The artist's signature was important, you know, that one had a style. You could identify a photograph through a particular way of looking at things, the way the photographer looked at things. And we were trying to kind of get beyond that and not make, you know, our own style, but just to create this dialogue about the implication of documentary and what that means. These photographs, by definition, are documents of some kind of process. They were made without any kind of intention for expressiveness. And we were able to use that very strongly because they were what they were. They were not our photographs. They were made as just information. But then by taking them out of the context that they existed in and putting them next to each other in this new context of the book, in this new sequence, all of a sudden they become energized with a poetry, a kind of lyrical interrelation that's kind of exciting and magical, and that is very romantic actually as an idea. So the push-pull between the idea of documentary, using documentary, but then taking the documentary photograph and turning it into its upside downness and making it into something else, that's really why evidence was a good, you know, useful, what it meant.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I think that was really a perfect description from the artist himself. Do we have time for a few questions? Is that
No,
kind
we've
of?
got to go to the end.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God. I'm just jumping
Just
ahead
keep
because we've
going.
reached the hour.
Well, actually, what we want to get to now is
Okay.
I want to say that before we get to this next one, as Larry and I, we stopped working at some point where Larry was doing, his own things, and there's, our own personal lives kind of got in the way, and, I kind of went one way, and I moved out of the area, and Larry was doing his project Pictures from Home, and I was doing a book about the San Francisco Giants. I was on traveling around the United States doing that. But we decided we would also, we'd seen Barbara Jo Ravel's piece in Denver of this interesting mosaic that she had done, and we were using mosaic tiles. And there's a number of pieces that Larry and I did with using these photographs as source material and making these large-scale mosaics out of 1-inch tile. And the last piece I wanted to include in the show is the fact that we submitted this to the New York Transit Authority, the New York Subway, whatever they call themselves, Metropolitan Transit Authority, and for a big, long 100-foot mosaic tile project, which they rejected. And we then made a very similar one, similar in basically the theme of passengers on the train for BART, and they also rejected it and didn't allow us. And then we realized that for the kind of work that we do, we weren't going to be able to get the projects, because public art is not something that you can just get because you want it. It's a committee of people that have to decide that they're going to give it to you. And so I wanted to show the kind of work that we were thinking about doing, and we did a few pieces that were commissioned, but then we realized at some point it wasn't going to be able to be something that we could actually do together with our sensibility. So I decided, since Larry had so many ways of making a living, he had his full-time teaching job, he was doing great editorial work, he was doing advertising, he was doing his own personal work, and I had no job, and I had nothing going on for me to make any money. I said, Larry, I think I really just need to take this on for myself. And I was basically the one who'd gotten most of the computer stuff organized for this. And he said, kind of regretfully, okay, you just go on. So I kind of took on about a 15-year career doing public art using this process of photographs as source material, making large-scale pieces for public institutions. But I wanted to show you how Larry and I thought about using this process. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.